So last week you looked at some different ways to analyze advertising, including the graphic design, the visuals, the photography, as well as claims, values. But I didn't say a whole lot about how to write an essay about advertising, and that's what I want to do this week, help you understand this assignment and why we're doing it, but also what it's asking you to do. A few new challenges come with this sort of writing, and I just want to be clear how this second essay will be quite different from the first one you wrote. First of all, if you could call the first essay personal writing, this essay will be more academic, more formal in some ways, in part because in the first essay you were developing a story. In this essay you're developing an argument, and that's really not quite the same thing. Many of us find it a lot easier to write a story than it is to write a more academic essay, maybe partly because we're writing about something we know best, which is ourselves. And some of you wrote beautiful stories. I haven't read them all yet, but I will be doing that soon. The other change here, though, is that in the first essay you needed to find a good topic, one with autobiographical significance and meaning to you and to others. Here, though, for this essay, you'll not simply develop a topic, but also develop an argument and a thesis statement. And those are things I want to talk more about in the next two lessons. Before we talk about thesis statements, that's really the next lesson. I want to help you understand the basic task of this essay assignment, just to be clear what it's asking you to do. So a few things. Here's how the assignment sheet describes it. Hopefully you read that already. Basic tasks, really 5 related, but all slightly different things. This assignment requires you to first analyze 2 or 3 advertisements. A familiar word, but we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Second, compare and contrast the ways that ads work. Third, draw some conclusions about the significance of your analysis, and I really want to talk about that as well. The so what question. Fourth, develop a clear and forceful thesis statement. And fifth, support and defend your thesis in a well-crafted essay. The fourth and fifth items there really are the focus of the next sort of mini lecture. The focus of this one really is the first 3 here. But these words, all of which you've seen before many times, but I want to kind of zero in on what I mean by some of those words and how you do those things in an essay. So let me come at it this way. You might think, well, writing about ads, I need to write about what I see in the ads. I want to move you from the sense that you're doing that in an essay to think about these two, and I put it in a sort of cheesy way here. You could think of it as, what do you see, and then so what, and say what. So see what, so what, and say what is a cheesy but simple way to understand the progression or the move you need to make in this essay from description, which is what you did a lot of in the first essay, to what we could call analysis. That answers the so what question about what you see. And then using analysis to build an argument and a persuasive argument. So these 3 things are the primary skills that you're sort of practicing by doing this sort of essay. So with ads, what do you see? Well, all of these things, which we've already talked about to some extent. Photography, you can point out all kinds of aspects of content, context, and composition especially. Certainly graphic design, not only those 4 elements I talked about in the presentation, but lots of other things you could just simply notice. And then we didn't talk as much about wordplay and the use of words, the use of not just meaningful statements, but even meaningful words. And the word connotations here is a fancy way of saying all the meanings that a single word can carry. And we can look at that a little more. The so what question, though, is where analysis comes in. That's where you say, okay, I noticed this about the photography. What does that mean? What does it speak to? Why is it there? And so much about ads is not coincidental or accidental, it's intentional. So the so what question says, here's what I see, here's what I think it means or might mean, And in each case here, what's in red essentially says what's the significance, what's the so what for each of these. Doing this kind of thinking about ads, making this move, is where you're going to get material for an essay. It's also the kind of thinking you'll do in other courses in college. That's not to say descriptive writing isn't important in this essay. This assignment does build on your first essay. But here's a rule to keep in mind. You should only describe something in the ads if that description serves or supports your analysis. What do I mean by that? It means you should only describe carefully what you see when you're making a point about it. When you're saying, here's why it's there, even if you're guessing why it's there. I can use an example from descriptive writing or a remembered event essay. If you mention a person in your remembered event essay, some of you, because I encouraged you to use descriptive writing, described people in detail, 5'6", brown hair, glasses, leather shoes, jeans. But that sort of description is only necessary in such an essay if it serves a purpose, if it helps the reader kind of gain a sense of who that person is. Same goes for this. You'll want to describe things in these ads that you see as meaningful. Let me just give you a little example of this kind of analysis. If we were in class together, I might ask you to do this together. What comes to mind when you think about the color red? Very simple question. We could fill the board. I just came up with a bunch of things very quickly. Danger, stop signs, adventure, warm, hot, caution, warning, spicy, red hots, cherry red, candy apple red, little red Corvette, before your time, some of you, that song, Red Riding Hood, etc. I could go on and on and on. What's the point? Well, look at two recent ads that use a lot of red. Simple thing I might notice, that's what I see in these ads first. The first one is from an ad for Canon cameras. This was the opening page, and then it had this page. The second one from a series from Toyota, Everyone Deserves to Be Safe, about a new safety system. Now, in this ad, I might say, well, the ad uses a lot of red. Why? Well, excitement, it's edgy, it seems adventurous, maybe wild, and that's a theme that kind of goes with Canon. Here, I would suggest it's not at all edgy or exciting or adventurous. In fact, I think what the red does here is it suggests caution, danger, and then reassures us with words like safe and Toyota. And they want us, of course, to think of those words together. So I think the red here serves a very different purpose than it does here, even though it's the same color. And in our minds, however, we can associate it with different things. Now, doing that is, in a sense, moving from description to analysis, and then I'll show you an example of this. I might say, describing, well, this ad uses a lot of red, a really bold color. It's really bright, it looks cool. But then I might turn that into analysis by saying something like this. The Canon ad uses a bold background of red to give the viewer a sense of excitement, energy, maybe even danger. Now, I'm sort of making this up, but if I were to turn that into a part of an essay, I might work it in this way. With this ad, Canon wants to set apart its new camera model from the competition, making its product seem adventurous and exciting. The bold red background in this ad, for example, jumps out at the viewer and seems to promise that the buyer will be, as the ad slogan puts it, inspired by Canon. And what I've done is I've taken description and turned it into support for an argument.